My dear ones, I want to raise my hands up to Sawet Laylam, the House of Learning here at Langara. I'm honored to stand here and share with you a conversation about what does it mean to us as Musqueam people to move forward. I think that's a very important question that we all ask ourselves in the time that we're living in. This beautiful place called LangaraCollege is a place of learning, a place of education, and I think at the time that we're living in today, that is even more important in history than it's ever been, because what is education to us? How do we define it today in this world we live in after everything we've been through? Not only as First Nations people, but all people throughout the world. I stand before you also wearing my history, wearing my education, how I see the values and who we are as Musqueam people. It's an education that was overlooked and misunderstood by the first ships that arrived here in 1791. When Captain Vancouver landed here and 7 canoes came down from what you know as Spanish banks and went out to meet the captain, of course they couldn't converse, they spoke a different language. But there was also a Spanish ship there from Madrid. And it was him who quoted that these 7 canoes have come down from the bluff. And inside each canoe is a family. And each canoe is what we see as reflective of how these people live their lives. Fishing gear all throughout the canoe. But made in such a way that it took intelligence, it took understanding about the environment that we all live in today, on how we could survive. And being the kind of people we were at the time, we shared that information with those 2 ships. And one of them sailed away and never to come back, but the other one from England came back 3 years in a row. And Captain Vancouver wrote some very beautiful and wonderful things about who we were as people in English. He wrote that these people are the women are as beautiful and as regal as our own. They're wearing beautiful blankets, much like the one I'm wearing now. And this isn't just a beautiful blanket. It's a blanket that defines who we are as people. And so when we do anything in our community, when we have a ceremony, when we're teaching, when we're living the way that we lived pre-contact and well into the first part of contact, these blankets were used for everything in our community, in our villages. So the first thing that we do is that we take our blankets in ceremony, we put them down, and we stand on them. We stand in our history. We stand in who we are, based on all of the knowledges of our past people. I used to spend a lot of time driving with my grandfather, who lived to be 100 years old, past this very place, down along the rivers, down along the waterfront, all the way through Vancouver, up into New Westminster, into all the villages that we had at one time. So this was my history. This was my education, my school. I stand on it. And when I did grow up and went to a public school, I used to wonder where we were. And I would sit back and think about it. And very quickly, as I moved through my life, I realized that we were nowhere in Vancouver. So I used to ask Vancouver, silently to myself, who are you? How do you define yourself? Oh, Canada, we say we're a multicultural people, but the very people whose land it's been built on are not included. So we move forward again, and we're here in this time frame that we live in. And residential schools come to the surface. The conversation is open now. And how do we move forward with that, or do we? And we talk about truth and reconciliation. And everyone asks me, how do we reconcile? And they ask many people. They ask the leaders, how do we reconcile? And today I've heard from many leaders and from many people that we cannot reconcile until the truths are talked about, until the truths are dealt with. What are the truths that have happened to our people over the last 150 years? Well, we don't want to really talk about it because it isn't a very, very good subject. But it's one that has to be done. And so all throughout Canada now, we are looking at ways, how can we as people today in places like this teach and learn about the truths of the history of Canada? How do we do that? You do it by inviting people like myself to come and stand before you and look at this beautiful, beautiful reflection in the back behind me about how we educate, how we taught our children about education. For to be a weaver is all about mathematics, counting, adding, dividing, subtracting, using our sciences, going out into the environment and finding ways of dyeing our wool so that it didn't run out of the material. Talking about social studies, which was our history, which is still my history. When I drove along the shores with my grandfather, there was 300 years and 400 years and 500 years of stories being told. When asked of the First Nations people, who said this land belonged to you? The answer came to me. It isn't written on a mountaintop, it's written in the earth. The way you see these blankets behind me again are the way we tell our stories. The oral traditions in which we're called to witness everything that we talk about. Oral traditions are as powerful as written. There's a man called Jesus who walked the earth. We're going to celebrate his birthday soon. Or do we celebrate it? Do we celebrate after everything that's happened? But it wasn't him who wrote those books. He was an oral traditional man. He didn't write. It was 2,000 years later that a book came to be that wrote about him. Did they tell the truth? Is that really who he was? Is this what he wanted for his people? To come to another land and do what has happened, not only in our land, but lands all throughout the world. And so there's much to do, much education to learn, much ways in which we're going to have to redefine and look at how do we, as a human race together, how do we move forward in this multicultural world we live in? I've often shared with many of my friends who have come here to live now, and I've asked the question, why did you leave your home? What is it that you didn't feel it had to offer, that you had to come to another land? Because the questions arrive in my village that we don't like to leave our land. Our roots are planted very firmly in the soil that our ancestors are buried. And with that is the knowledge of who we are as First Nations. Much knowledge. As much knowledge as that very first person who walked the earth and they wrote the book about had, is that we all have knowledge. And where is it written that we all have to learn one way? Where is it written that we have to all speak the same language in order to understand who we are? Is that the direction we're going in as we look, how do we move forward after COVID? COVID made us stop in our tracks. It made us stop and reevaluate who are we as human beings, as spirits. There was so much fear in the world that this little tiny virus had power over all of us. Even the people with the most money couldn't stop it. So we live in fear of it, but we have much trust in the intelligence of our scientists, of the people who began many years ago to understand what plants and medicines were about. And so we have so much work to do as we stand still. We stand in who we are. We reevaluate. The fellow that was here before I was talked about a COVID world. And for me, I stood in front of my loom and I asked for quietness. And I gave myself strength to be able to move and continue to do the work that I was doing so that I would have faith instead of fear. I had faith in those individuals who had such intelligence to make those what we need to heal. And so I felt sure that they could do that because I had faith in them. They didn't come into this world to not do that. And so how do we move forward from that? Or do we? I always like to say, as my grandfather gave me such beautiful advice, that we move backwards as well. We go back when we stand still and we look at who we are as human beings, as spirits who are connected to everything around us. We're connected to the environment, to the water, to the universe. We're a part of the living beings that are here in the earth. And too many times we get focused on just one way. And it's good to have focus, but to be inclusive to what is the gifts around you, the gifts that were given to you when you entered this world. And so that's part of what comes to be when I ask people, why do you leave your country to come here? We welcome you here. You share your information with us. I work with schools now. And the schools sometimes might feel a little uncomfortable at the fact that I have information that is equally important. And they feel a little bit of a threat to say, well, what about our history? And I say, you must feel the same uncomfortableness I felt when I came to your school, in understanding that conversations were only going to be about your way in the assimilation process. Why they took our children out of our homes to residential school, to take the Indian from the Indian. When they no longer speak their language and they no longer identify with who they are, then they are assimilated to be Canadians, and we will no longer have to worry about them or be responsible. They were never responsible for us. I live in a place called Musqueam. It's a village, one village of many. It's a village, not a reservation. It was never reserved. We have been there for thousands of years. How dare they use that English term, reservation? And these are the things that are coming back to us as people who are of this land. But we want to share that information with you in Vancouver, and in Langara especially, because you are here on our traditional territory. Your name talks about the House of Learning. We were learning before the Europeans arrived. We were thriving. We were preparing every harvest. It's harvest time right now. Do we celebrate Thanksgiving? Are we thankful the same way the Pilgrims were when they first set out that first Thanksgiving? I don't know. Do we change and we shift to accept it? Many questions arise at this time after COVID. Where do we go from here? How do we move forward? If we haven't learned something, if we haven't taken the time to learn from what has made us stand still for a year, then we're in big trouble. The first thing I heard when we were allowed to come out is, oh, I can't wait to get on a plane. I can't wait to do this and I can't wait to do that. And I thought, did we learn anything? What about maintaining that for your families, for your community? That it's beautiful to be home. It's beautiful to be with your family. It's beautiful. It teaches us something. It teaches us how we disconnected. We are disconnecting as we move forward. And this somehow made us stop and we reconnect. You know, they talk about anxiety, they talk about stress. Is it stressful to stay home with your family? Shouldn't be. Our people are communal people, they live together. But have we become individual as well? I hope not. I hope that we all have learned something from COVID, even though it was a scary time and a fearful time. I hope that we draw on our cultures, because as the wonderful Maya Angelou says, we're as much alike as we are different. Let's celebrate that. Multicultural Canada. Let's celebrate each other instead of looking negatively at each other. Stand in who you are and share that with people. Respect it. Teach your children that. It's a big job, but I think we can do it. I have great faith that I will share with other people what it means to be a weaver, what it means to understand the gifts that we've all been given, whether we're in an institute like this, and I don't want to call it an institute anymore because it has a beautiful name. It's a place of learning and exchanging. And that's a good place to be. And I hold my hands up to Langara because they invited me here 3 or 4 years ago to be the first to take my way of learning into the textile room of arts. Now you say arts, and I got to share that with the youth here. I got to remind them that they all come from a history of weaving, as we all do. So in moving forward, I hope we keep that thread that spins through time, spins through the universe, and connects us to who we are. Back in time, through those threads comes information that will balance us. So we need to look for the balance as we move forward. Not one way or another way, but the balance of it. And so I hold my hands up again to Langara for opening this conversation up to many people. And to all of you, I hope you, as you move forward, remember that every step you take forward, take just as many back. So Haj Kasiyam, to this place of learning, for asking me to come forward and be with you today. And I hope you all have a wonderful Thanksgiving, because we have much to be thankful for. Haj Kasiyam to everyone. Thank you.